Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 29 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about all the mathematical functions that are available in SQL Server. We'll be looking at all these functions that you can see on the slide. Now, in order to find out what are the different functions that are available in SQL Server, go into Object Explorer window, expand databases. Within databases, expand any database. Let's expand sample, and within the sample database folder, expand programmability and then functions folder. Within functions folder, expand system functions, and finally look for mathematical functions folder, expand that. You should see all the mathematical functions that are available in SQL Server. Today we will examine a few of them that are commonly used. Okay, we'll look at this absolute function ABS, which stands for absolute. This function returns the absolute number. When we say absolute, the positive number. Now whatever you pass to this function, let's say here, if you look at the example that we have here, we are passing in a negative value, okay, which has got a minus sign as well. Now when you pass that to absolute function, it returns an absolute number ignoring the sign. So we get 101.5 without that minus sign. So that's what basically the absolute function does, which is very simple to understand. It has got just one parameter. Alright, the next two useful functions are ceiling and floor. Okay, now if you look at these functions, they just take one parameter. Okay, now let's look at the example first. If you look at the ceiling example here, the first query, to the ceiling function we are actually passing 15.2. So what is the next highest value of 15.2? It's 16. So ceiling returns 16. So if you're passing a decimal number, ceiling will return the next highest value. Okay, ceiling is the higher one. Ceiling is on the top and roof is on the floor. Maybe those are the reasons why ceiling returns the highest number and floor returns the lowest number. So if you look at this, floor of 15.2 returns 15. Okay, now if you pass a negative number, look at this. For ceiling we are passing 15.2. Now since it is a negative number, minus 15 is greater than minus 16. So ceiling of a negative number will give minus 15, because minus 15 is greater than minus 16. Okay, but whereas when you look at the floor, minus 15.2 returns 16. Why? Because 16 is lesser than minus 15. Okay, so basically ceiling and floor returns the next highest integer value. Okay, so if you look at the definition here, ceiling and floor functions accept a numeric expression as a single parameter. Ceiling returns the smallest integer value greater than or equal to the parameter, whereas floor returns the largest integer less than or equal to the parameter. Okay, the next function is the power function. Okay, now basically, as the name suggests, the power function returns the power of a number. If you look at the example here, power of 2, 3. So in this function takes two parameters. The first parameter, the expression, will act as the base, whereas the second parameter will act as the power. So if I pass 2, 3 to this power function, we are saying calculate 2 to the power of 3. 2 to the power of 3 is 8, so this function returns 8. So similarly, if I pass 4, 3, we want to calculate 4 to the power of 3. 4 into 4 into 4, which is 64. 4, 4, 16, 16 4s, 64. Alright, the next function is the square function, again, which is very simple and straightforward. Square function returns the square of a number. So if I pass, for example, 3 into 3 is 9, so we get 9 back, which is simple and straightforward. Okay, and we have another function, square root, again, which is very straightforward. If you give a number, it will calculate the square root of that given number. So here we are passing 81 to this function. It returns 9. By the way, square root has this abbreviation sqrt is the name of the function. We don't call it as square root, but sqrt stands for square root. Okay, so the next useful function that we'll look at is the random function, rand function. Okay, so as the name says, random, it gives a random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so it actually gives us a decimal number. Let's look at that first. Okay, now I'm not going to execute all these queries that we have seen because they're pretty straightforward. You can just understand them and you can run them in SQL Server Management Studio. So let's start with random function. So if you look at random function, when I say select random, look at the IntelliSense in SQL Server Management Studio. This is expecting an integer parameter, seed value. Now that is optional. So if you look at the documentation in MSDN, random of seed value parameter is within the square bracket. So anything within square brackets is optional according to the MSDN documentation. So we don't have to supply a value for the seed value parameter. Okay, so if we don't supply a value for seed parameter and I execute this function, look at this, I get a random number between 0 and 1. This will never cross 1. So when I execute it multiple times, look at the value, it gets changed every time I execute, and this value is between 0 and 1. And if you look at the way I'm calling this function, I'm not passing it any parameter. Now on the other hand, if I pass a seed value, so let's say I'm passing in seed value, and let me execute this. I executed this, I got some 713. I execute that again, look at that, I get the same number, it doesn't change. So if you supply a seed value and execute that query, no matter how many times you execute that, you end up getting the same value. Okay, so if you want to use rand function, want to get the same value, you use the same seed value. If you don't provide a seed value, then it gives you a random number every time you execute between 0 and 1. Okay, so the next question is, let's say I want to print a random number between 0 and 100. How do I do that? I can make use of the floor and rand functions, because look at this, every time I execute random function, what do I get? I get some random number. Okay, but my requirement here is to generate a random number between 1 and 100, and to do that, if I multiply this, whatever is returned by random number, if I multiply that with 100 and if I select the whole thing, look at what's going to happen. So I execute this, look at this, I get 34 point something, I execute that again, 21 point something, but I don't want the decimal part, I only want the the integer part. How do I do that? Maybe you can use ceiling or floor methods just to get the integral parts, the next integer. Okay, so I'm going to use the floor function maybe here. So it's going to knock off those decimal places and give me the integer. So when I execute that, I get 79, I execute again 50. So if you keep on executing that, you get different number, but it will always be between 1 and 100. Okay, between 0 and 100 rather. Alright, now let's say I want to print 10 random numbers between 1 and 100. If you want to print, just put that in a loop. So what are we doing here? We are creating a variable called counter of type integer, and then we are initializing that to 1, and we are checking, okay, is the counter value less than or equal to 10? So if it is, then we are having the same statement here, but instead of select, we are saying print the value and increment the counter value. If you don't have this line, this loop will become a never-ending loop. Okay, so obviously now when we execute this, you should see 10 random numbers between 1 and 100. I execute that again, you get a different set of 10 random numbers between 1 and 100. Now let's say I want 10 random numbers between 1 and 1000. Is it possible? Absolutely. Just multiply this by 1000 and you should get 10 random numbers between 1 and 1000. Okay, so that's about rand function. So remember, rand function returns a random float number between 0 and 1. Random function takes an optional seed parameter. When the seed value is supplied, the rand function always returns the same value for the same seed. Okay, if you want to generate a random number between 1 and 100, we have seen how to do that, and we also have seen how to print 10 random numbers between 1 and 100. The final function that we will look at today is round. This is very important function, and I believe every developer would have used this at least 1 or 2 times in their life in any project. Alright, so let's see what's the significance of this round function. Round function, as the name suggests, it rounds the number. Okay, now if I give it a decimal number, you can tell it, okay, round it to 2 places or 3 places. Now if you look at this function, it has got 3 parameters. Now rather than reading the description of these parameters, let's try to understand the role of these parameters with the help of practical examples. Okay, so if you look at the examples on the screen, this function, look at this. The first parameter is the number that I want to round. Actually, let's look at the second example first. So the first parameter is the number that I want to round. Okay, and the second parameter will tell, okay, you want to round this first number, but how many decimal places do you want to round that number to? Okay, so I want to round this number to 2 decimal places. That's what you are telling. Okay, so this number is 850.556, and you are saying I want to round this to 2 decimal places with the help of the second parameter. Okay, so obviously what happens, this will be rounded to 85. Actually, we picked the wrong example. Okay, now let's look at the first example itself, because we need to understand the role of this last parameter, which is nothing but the function parameter, and this parameter is optional. If you look at the first example, we haven't supplied 3 parameter, the third parameter there. We are supplying it only here. Now actually round function, it does two things. It either rounds the given number or it truncates the given number. Now, whether you want to round a given number or truncate a given number is controlled by this third parameter. So if you specify, 1 as the third parameter, then you're telling the round function, don't round it, truncate it. Truncate it to 2 decimal places. So anything after 2 decimal places, just ignore that. So it's saying truncate this 850.556 to 2 decimal places. So what it does is it converts this, it ignores this 6 and converts that to 0. So that's why we get 850.550. On the other hand, if you look at the first example, here we are not using that, the function parameter, the third parameter. So if you don't use that, the default is 0, which means when you specify a value of 0, or if you don't specify any value at all, which is where the default is 0, then the function actually rounds the value. So you're telling it to round to 2 decimal places. Since we have 6 here, so obviously it will round this number to 850.560, which is what this one will return. I hope this makes clear. The first parameter is the number that we want to round to. The second parameter is the length of the rounding. How many decimal places do you want to round to? And the third parameter is the function parameter, which you use to decide whether you want to round the number or truncate the number. A value of 0 indicates that you want to round it, and the default, if you don't specify, is 0. A non-zero value could be 1, could be 99. A non-zero value indicates that you want to truncate the number and not round it. Okay, now if you look at the the third example here, you are saying, okay, round it to 1 decimal place. So obviously 0.556, 56. So these two will be rounded to 0.600, which is 850.600. Okay, now look at the fourth example here. Obviously you are saying truncate it to 1 decimal place. So what happens to 5 and 6? They will be truncated, okay, after the decimal place. So that's why it says 850.500. Okay, and the fifth example here, if you look at this one, look at this. For the length parameter, this is important and interesting. For the length parameter, I'm saying I'm providing a negative value. So when you provide a negative value, you are asking the round function to round, the numbers or the digits left to the decimal point. Okay, so you're telling this round function to round these two places, 50, round these two numbers that are to the left of the decimal point. So what's going to happen? 50 will be rounded to 900, so 900.000. Okay, so when you specify a negative number, you are actually telling the round function to round the digits to the left of the decimal point. When you use a positive number, you're telling it to round the digits that are right to the decimal point. Okay, so this round function, there's almost anything that you can achieve, either rounding or truncation, with the help of these three parameters. Okay, and finally, the last example, if you look at it, you are saying it round the last, one digit to the left of the decimal place. Okay, so obviously it returns 850.000 because 0 and it's 5, so it just rounds that to 0 anyways, so we get 850.000. All right. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.